senator, elected officials, community people, religious leaders, leaders in the community present, and all those who were part of the support for SAE, and all those of you who recognize that at this time of the year, as we gather hands all around the world to say Happy International Women's Day. When we gather as women and we reflect, I know for sure we just don't think about ourselves and our communities. That in order for us to reach gender parity, as the UN has urged us to do, work for gender parity by the year 2024. We know that we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of solidarity, reaching hands have to take place. We have to care not only about our own situation, but we have to look at the situation of women around the world. Some of you may have been around 1975 when for the first time the UN pulled together a conference of all of the nations and states of the world, 198 countries of the world, and asking them about the situation of women in their countries. And after finding out a whole series of things, all the mantra that we know, women do 99% of the work and own 1% of the property, you know, that whole list of things that came out. And then they said, give us 10 years, we'll make it all good. So we came back in 1985. Mexico City, 75, Nairobi, 1985. And all kinds of stuff came out in Nairobi. Governments report, NGOs report, and we saw that we did not make all that much progress since 1975. In Canada, we felt good because we went in with a whole list of the status of women, provincial and federal, that we put in place. And we had started to do some research. 1985, they said, we need 10 more years. How can we reach gender parity? We need 10 more years. 10 more years we got to Beijing, and the cry, women's rights are human rights. Remember that, if some of you are as old as I am? Women's rights are human rights. And this is where we are right now in that whole discussion. All rights are human rights, at the same time being encouraged to work towards gender parity, so that all the discussions would have those lens. But for some of us, the lens are wider. The intersectionality of a whole lot of stuff, who we are. And so when we gather to empower, when we gather with an organization that's doing good work, not only here, but also reaching out to enable our sisters in other parts of the world to have some of the opportunities and to make some progress. Because you see, we just don't all have to start whatever. We have experiences that we learned and things we can share, and knowledge, awareness, education, solidarity, all those are such important words. When I'm asked usually to tell my story, I think my story is out there and many of you know my story. But at the same time, I have so much to be thankful for. I can say almost what Desmond Tutu said. He's a good friend of mine, and so I drop his name, don't feel too. When he received the Nobel Peace Prize, as you know, Desmond is not a tall man, right? He said, if I stand tall, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of so many people who are supporting me. and I can add, and have supported me. When my bio is read, and the list of things that I've done or on my bio that I feel that there are more contributions than it is kind of taking the credit for the founder, because you can't found something until you have a whole lot of people around you to give you validity to whatever it is. Everything is almost a team sport. Every aspect of our lives, our aspect that we have to look at the dependency on others. Who were around the table? What was the support that there was? What advice did I take? And who can we trust to buttress and to hold us up at the important times? And where do we learn those things about resilience? As the old song says, fall on your behind, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep going. Mira, you think you agree with that? And I think all of us would agree, because this is why we are around here. This is why we were able to come, to have the time to come and the time to spend. Because resiliency, that ability, and I learned that growing up in Happy Hill, St. George's, Grenada. Pick yourself up. You know the old, there is something around, I've just lost his name. I'm 82 years old this year, so I can tell you. And it goes, everything I know, I learned in kindergarten. Have you seen that? If you haven't, Google that. It begins, everything I know I learned in kindergarten. Hold hands. Give me another one, somebody. Have a nap. Right, walk in a straight line. Right, share, play, all of those things you learned in kindergarten that somehow we seem to forget as we get older and older. But we have to go back, because those are the things. The Africans put it in another way. It takes a village to raise a child. A village, a supportive village. And there are other things that I learned that's also part of my life. Many of you might know that old thing, the two roads that seem to set off in whatever, who knows that? Was it Robert Frost? Right? And I took one and not the other. You had a choice, you can go this road or you can go that way. There were two words I learned very, very early in life. And those two words I was told never to use and never to have in my vocabulary. And those two words are, if only. I learned very early that those are two killer words, if only. I learned, because it's tied to that if you did your best at all times, if you gave 100% at all times, then the regret words, if only, will never be and can never be in your vocabulary. If only I had said that. If only I had done that. If only I had stayed longer. If only I had... Those are killer words, because they damage self-esteem. And I learned that very early. I also learned very, very early an old African proverb. If we cross the river together, the alligators won't bother us. If we cross the river together, the alligators won't bother us. And most of us know that old fable of the man dying, called his son. His sons together were constantly fighting, and he had a pile of sticks, And he asked them to break it stick by stick. They were able to break stick by stick. But then when he wrapped the bundle together and he said, now break it, they could not break the bundle. And that was his final message to his sons. If you work together, if you live together, combine together, you won't be broken. And I think within our families, we have to pass that message. If we do this together, if we understand each other. There is an African bird, and I forgot the name of it now, but the head goes back. What's it called again? Yeah, and the message is you have to look back in order to go forward. And we put it in terms, in Canadian terms, you have to know where you're coming from in order to know where you're going to. And I also learned very early that the world makes way for the person who knows where he or she is going. And I have been and I've had examples in my own life where things have happened. Things have happened simply because the universe knows where the heart is, where the need is, where the commitment is. About a month ago, I was sitting at home feeding my addiction. You want to know what I'm addicted to? CNN. CNN has taken over my life. And I'm going to find a good voodoo man or OBA woman to see how I can get CNN out of my life. But I think as long as the good old Trump is there, there will always be a need. I also learned very early, and I try teaching that to my girls, never be satisfied with fairly good, good enough, pretty good. Just as I learned, you give 100% at all times, I learned very early that you reach for the sky. You aim for the sky. And as someone said, if you aim way up there, you're going to get something on the way down. You may not reach what you were aiming for, but in the effort and in the thinking, there are a whole lot of stuff that would come. I also lived with the premise that one has to take risk, and that if someone is always very timid, unsure to ask, unsure to say exactly and precisely what it is that they're seeking, that creates lack of opportunities. And I have an old saying, again I learned, opportunity dances with those on the dance floor. If you're not on the dance floor, when opportunity is doing its thing, you're not there. It's important to show up. It's important to support. It's important, and I learned the whole issue of support. Politics is a team sport. I have to vote for you, want to vote what your passion is, and you have to support my passion. So when I put something forward, I can get that support. There's no solo there. And if we have to make some progress as women, we have to realize that we have to support each other. And something I also learned, if you want to win the war, you cannot fight every single battle. You have to be strategic, so that when you knock this down, this whole table comes down. When you knock something else over there, it takes out a whole series. Bad analogy, huh? of war. Where am I going with that? The general idea is that we have to be strategic in terms of how we want to see change happen. We have to be strategic. And I learned that in several ways. I learned that in classrooms. How many of you have heard the story? I was late for school because the train was in my way, or because the neighbor's dog was, etc. And young people know how to be strategic. They know how to find their way, they know how to find their words. Think of what happens in your own household. I learned also that I have to commit myself to some ideal. Commit yourself to some ideal. Refuse to go with the flow. I lost a lot of friends because of this refusal to go with the flow. It's so much easier to go with the flow. And it's so much, the difficulties are there when you go against the flow, because then you get a lot of things. Who do you think you are? What do you think you this? Da 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 da. And I learned also, as part of my life experience, that if after I put the phone down from talking with you, I feel bad about myself and where I want to go, I don't want to talk to you again. I'm so happy now that there is number recognition, right? That you can see on the phone who is calling you, and you say, her? I am really in a good mood. Do I pick up this phone and find myself in the depths of whatever? And we also have to ask ourselves questions about how we affect people. What is my effect on that individual? When I make that call to someone, or when I say hello, or whatever, am I just doing this because I want something? It used to happen when my kids were away at university. My first question was, what do you want? What is this going to cost me? We have to begin to examine our behavior on both sides. When our number shows up, is it going to be a nice welcoming? Thank God, I can now talk about something and feel some sisterhood in this conversation, rather than when you put the phone down, you say, where is the closest window I can jump? I have always believed that each person, through self-improvement and helping others, every person has an obligation to make a difference for good in the world. Each one of us has an obligation to make or to help to make a difference for good in the world. Oftentimes, and I learned that very early, your life may be the only example that individual may have. Your voice at a particular point in time may be the encouraging voice that's needed. And so we must not discount our ability to affect other people's lives. Little did I know that growing up in Happy Hill, St. George's, Grenada, sitting on the floor in the church and in the school, because the little ones were always brought to the front, that I would go from Happy Hill, St. George's, Grenada to Parliament Hill, Ontario, Canada. Little did I dream that starting out in this country, as a domestic worker would at the same time bring me to the place where I would be a school principal in some of the largest schools in the city, in the Catholic School Board, and that I would have the opportunity to make some decisions as chair of Metro Toronto Housing Authority, 110,000 people living in rent get to income. Life is a journey. And it's hard when someone asks, would you talk about yourself? What can you tell about that journey? All the in-between things that you had to omit in order to get to the story. And because it's a journey and we're all on the road in this journey, I try to begin each day by thinking, this is a day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Let us be so thankful for all those who are on the road with us. 2018 was a difficult year for me because I think just about every month I went to a funeral or I went to a memorial. And one of the resolutions that I made for 2019 was that I would try every month to get together with 4 or 5 friends for coffee, for tea, for laugh, for sharing of stories. I've done 1 so far. So good grief, good God, help me to do a few more. Because you feel so badly when people pass on and you didn't have the time to really say, goodbye, or say, have some nice memory of the last time that you spoke with the individual. And so we have to begin to wrap ourselves around each other, just as the Father did with the sticks, can't break us, just as the alligators can't get us if we cross the river together. And so I'm saying all that. I didn't tell you about broken marriage and raising children and racism and discrimination and all those things that happen. You pass the exam, yes, but the job is not for you. This place is for rent, yes, I know you could afford it, but it's not the good. We can't rent to you. All of those stories. But what we want to do is, as we look back, take the best of what there is in the society. Because I don't know of any place that I could have entered as a domestic worker and become Minister of State, Secretary of State, Minister for Multiculturalism, Deputy Speaker sitting in the chair conducting the business of the Government of Canada, sitting around tables all around the world. I've been to about 35 African countries and every place in the world that you can think of, given good opportunities by the Governor General, by my Prime Ministers, to be the representative of Canada and carry Canada's voices at the highest levels in the land. And oftentimes I felt that I was both the messenger and the message. That's another Canadian, right, expression. The messenger, because I was bringing Canada's message to the table. And I was the message, because this is what Canada is. And so we want to pass on to our young people and our young women in particular that the emphasis of International Women's Day was really an innovation, that women must find themselves in non-traditional places, non-traditional jobs, that we must remind those in leadership that we have to reach gender parity by 2020, so we have to do some more promotions. And we also have to remind, because oftentimes when we make the progress or when we push forward, white women, and I don't mean this in a negative fashion, white women get the opportunities, and then women of color have to come behind to get themselves, how about us, how about us? And that we have to begin to think diversity and inclusion in everything and everything that we do. I know I've spoken more than my time, and at the same time, I'm so very pleased that Cindy would have asked me to be part of this. I'm so very pleased that SAE is doing the work that it's doing, and that there are so many of you as supporters. And many of you who hear me talk would remember I end with this. I picked this up in the US a long, long time ago, but I found that it's so appropriate in the situation when we speak to women. And it was a pastor, Southern Baptist pastor, who was also an educator, and he was talking about the situation of black children in the system way back down south. And he gave a really good report of all the things that bear an education in the South. And he ended it by saying, and I'm going to try to mimic him here, we ain't where we could be. We ain't where we should be. We ain't where we ought to be. But thank God we ain't where we was. And when we look at ourselves, and I think about my work and the work of so many others in the community, I think I can say with him, we ain't where we ought to be, but we ain't where we was.